You'll often encounter the term the sociological imagination. So let's look at what's distinctive about thinking like a sociologist. Studying sociology is about seeing things and yourself in particular ways, in ways that you don't normally see them. Sociologists like to think that everyone who's not a sociologist has a common sense understanding of the world, and what sociologists can provide is a range of much more complex, nuanced and interesting ways of looking at yourself, your family, your friends and your environment. Most of us go through life, for example, guided to a greater or lesser extent by the thought that we control our lives, that we're free to choose the way we want to be in the world. Sociologists will question this idea and look for the ways in which our feelings, thoughts, ideas about the world are borrowed from the people and the world around us, the way in which all our thoughts and feelings are dependent on a context or a background of which we're mostly unaware. This issue becomes more apparent during times of significant social change. For example, what it means to be masculine, feminine or something else is actually constantly changing. If you watch a TV series like, say, Mad Men, gender identity is a central theme, and the scriptwriters are engaged in a complex project of both drawing our attention to how different things were in the 1960s, but also to make us question our memory of what things were like between men and women then, and how many of the changes that took place since then actually started much earlier than we thought. A useful way to understand the sociological imagination is to see it as being about getting below the surface of the human social world, to go beyond the way things appear at first glance, and to try and find more interesting, complex ways of explaining what is going on around you. In one way, it makes you a really tedious kind of person because you can't see, for example, the same film as your friends and family without having all sorts of observations and complaints about what is really going on in that film, when the people around you simply say either that they liked it or they didn't, without being able to say why. The capacity to say why, to put words to things, is a large part of what sociology is all about, to get underneath the surface of things and to show what's really happening in the everyday experiences that you have or in the events that go on around you. One good example of this is humour. If you think about why you laugh at things, why a joke is funny, I've always thought that one of the reasons we have that kind of emotional response to a joke is that it brings to the surface something that we kind of half knew but didn't quite have the words for or had never really thought about before. What makes a joke work is that it brings that aspect of an experience to consciousness suddenly, and we recognise it as true in an unexpected burst, so to speak. What a joke does is show us something that we kind of knew is true or captures something important about the world but have never really actually had words for, and brings it out in a way that's hard to explain. There's nothing more futile than trying to explain a joke. It's just not funny anymore. Much of this line of thinking can be traced to Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis, which revolves around the distinction between the unconscious mind and consciousness, and outlines the significance of bringing the unconscious to consciousness. Take a look at this clip from the TV show Portlandia. That segment contains, in a very compressed form, a whole range of arguments and observations about childhood, the way the education system works, parent-child relationships, the relationship between schools and families, what it's like to be a teacher, competition, and so on. The reason it's funny is that it compresses all of those thoughts into a situation where we can read them into that situation, but only in a semi-conscious way. It's embedded in that situation that's been constructed, rather than being made explicit. Often you can see a sociological imagination in the popular culture around you without it being obvious that that's what's going on. If you come to enjoy studying sociology, you'll find more and more examples of that as you look at the world around you, both in actual events and in popular culture. Here's another example from Seinfeld, the Snickers bar segment. I'm particularly interested in this example because I've done some work with the writings of a German sociologist, Norbert Elias, who talks about the history of the way in which personality structures have changed over the centuries. One of the bodies of evidence he looks at is books about etiquette and manners, and one of the issues is the use of the knife and fork. He looks at those historical periods when adults had to be told to use a knife and fork, when they'd be more inclined naturally to just use their fingers. Elias analyses how it emerged that we thought that the knife and fork was a good idea and an obvious part of eating. It's a development that for most of us occurs in our own lifetime, moving from childhood to adulthood, but it has a long historical trajectory as well. Trying to explain how and why that happened is an interesting sociological exercise, especially in terms of explaining what it is about the nature of society that drives people towards behaving in a certain way. If you ask why that's funny, what it's describing, what Elaine's missing when she demands, "Have you all gone mad?" It could be about how people imitate each other, a bandwagon effect, a group membership issue, or about aspiration and status. But there are more interesting things to say about this example. The word distinction comes to mind, and this is a key sociological concept, often used to capture how people relate to each other and how much value they place on being different from each other, but in a positive way. That's then the problem, how to be distinctive in ways that are socially valued. Competition is also clearly a central aspect of this example. There's a sense in which being in tune with the fashion for eating chocolate bars with a knife and fork gives you a sort of cultural advantage over everyone else, as an indication of a higher social status, and that's why it's a form of behaviour that people imitate. This example is humorous because it's a seemingly trivial thing, how to eat chocolate bars, but the observation of the logic of how human behaviour changes is perfectly accurate. There are endless other examples of changes in cultural behaviour that follow this pattern. How people speak, the music they listen to, the clothes they wear, the films they watch, the books they read, the cafes they visit, even the universities and the degrees they enrol in. There are many other aspects of human behaviour and relationships that we'll be looking at in developing a sociological imagination, but the important idea to begin with is that sociology does change how you see yourself as well as the people and the world around you. Sociology gives you the ability to understand who you actually are, your place in the social world, and the forces acting upon you. Given how quickly the world is changing, I hope you'll agree that this is an important skill to have. In summary, we talked about how thinking like a sociologist means seeing things in ways that are different from how you normally view the world in everyday life, going beyond common sense explanations to look beneath the surface of the social world around you. Second, humour is a good example of the sociological imagination because it brings to the surface of our minds things that we normally are not fully conscious of, and that's what makes a joke funny. We looked at two examples, one from the TV series Portlandia and another from Seinfeld. Third, both of these examples can be read in a particular way to show important things about how society functions and how social life and human behaviour change over time. Fourth, sociology gives you the ability to understand in a deeper way your identity, your place in the social world, as well as the forces acting on you without you being aware of them. And this is an important skill to have when social life is changing rapidly.